Presenting Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
All right. Evening, everybody. Let's see if this is going properly. Hey, Chris. Yep. Hey, Miles. Miles making his appearance already. Evening, Octavio. Hey, Martin. There's the guy. Hey, Karen and Evelyn and Bridget and Mary Jo.
Let's dance to a half-hour rhythm
Hey,
by
Sarah.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra, the Raja Rhythm.
Hey, Gladys.
From the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Dodging a Divorcee, the first number. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Hey, Rodney. Hey, Heather. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Laura. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Evelyn. Hey, Casey and Lori. Hey, everybody. Uh-oh. I feel like Miles is just about to make his jump. Hey, Betsy, Deirdre, Lori, Timberly. Anybody I might have missed? Nice new emoji, Timothy. Hey, Diane. Hey, Betsy, glad to have you even for a second. Hey, Heather. Hey, Timothy. Yeah, Laura, that's sad about Lisa Marie. And also, every time there's a sudden death these days, every anti-vax degenerate has to crawl out of their shithole and try to feel special for once in their miserable lives. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Denise. Hey, Lorena. Hey, Aaron. Hey, Karen. Hey, Elaine. Evening, Jordana. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Christy. I think all my parents are at Christy's house tonight. Hey, Bob. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Susan. Hey, Darlene. Yes, sometimes notifications don't go out on Facebook. You might have to rely on knowing that it's usually it's always on Thursdays at 8. But coming up in these next few weeks, we're gonna have a few of them that's gonna be on Wednesday. So make sure to check your listings. So I want everybody to be able to go to the Chicago for Chicagoans things that Layla and Mandy are doing on a couple of upcoming Thursdays. Hey, Mom.
The divorcee successfully, and we might say rhythmically eluded, Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing The Day I Let You Get Away.
Hey, Chuck. Hey, Gregory. Good evening, Ellen. Evening, Amy. Hey, Megan. Hey, Darlene. Hey, Kathy. Oh, hey, Miles. Miles just popped up onto here. You see the screen starting to rattle. That would be why. Miles has just plopped himself right down here. So a great look at Miles' butt. He really wants to show you his good side tonight. Hey, Carol. Hey, Elizabeth. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Eileen. Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. You guys are partying. There you go, Miles. There's the good side. There's that good side. All the good luck. Oh, yeah, I know this crowd loves butts. We all love butts. I know I do. Miles doesn't know if I'm broadcasting. If I ever just need a friendly cat, I can just turn on the computer up here. If I try to do it in the afternoon, he wants to climb all over me. But if I just set it up on here, maybe he'll come and just sit. I brought that on myself, I guess. He hurts me a lot in the afternoon. Hey, Eleanor. Miles, you're knocking stuff down.
Goodman and his orchestra. The next tune, Sandman.
But he's purring and purring. Miles, you can't have your tail right there, okay. Miles is not determined not to make this easy on me today. Miles is getting fur all over the computer. That can't be good. Hey, Grandma Belle. I looked into writing a book called Under the Bleachers by Seymour Butts for a while. Turns out there were some legal issues with... Sandy, we don't really do... We're not doing ghosts tonight. Ghosts isn't all I do around here. Over on YouTube. Hey, Laura. Hey, Gwen. I was mentioned on a tour, huh? All right. But Sandy, why wouldn't they have anything to do with ghosts? That's... All things being equal, I imagine one's sexuality probably does not impact whether one becomes a ghost upon death. Speaking of ghosts, the other day after I did the morning mini tour at the old car barn where the 1895 murder took place, I went in and chatted them up a little bit, and they said, oh, well, that explains the ghost. So...
Benny Goodman is playing for you from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And his next tune...
All right, we're going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune, then we're going to get started. Hey, Gene. Evening, Dina. Hey, Arlie. Laura, hope to make it a good night for you. Christy is officially here now. Okay. Real Housewives is over. Well, I know I can't compete with that. Evening, Lori. Hey, Kathy. Hey, June. Hey, Judy. Hey, Lynn. Always glad to have people post-workout. Does Ronnie watch the tour? Ronnie doesn't watch my tours when she's in town, let alone when she's out of town. But she's busy with school stuff anyway. Hey, well, I see you too, so that's a second opinion indicates that you're here. We'll have Benny Goodman and Helen Ward finish up this one tune. Fat Tuesday donuts. Is it Punchki Day already? That seems early. It's almost Hamantashen time. Hey, Dad. Hey, Ashley. Laura, definitely positive thoughts for your dad. As soon as this tune is over, we'll get going. Dad's eating somebody else's poison filter. Well, that's, I'm sure, great.
And again, Benny Goodman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so welcome along over here. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Welcome along. I'm Adam once again. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. With me, as always, is my co-host, Miles the Cat, showing us his good side once again. We started doing virtual tours about 2 years ago, but before I got around to that, I'd already published about 20 different books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Ghosts of Chicago. I also did this young adult novel called Sparks, which won a Stonewall Honor for queer fiction. And the newest, of course, is Graceland Cemeteries, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. Now, one thing we got to clear up before we even really get started here is it's very difficult to confirm queer stories in cemeteries. Most of these we're talking about people from a long time ago and talking about terms and identities that they may not have been very clear about. I was just reading a really interesting biography of Bram Stoker, the guy who wrote Dracula. By all accounts, it seems like he was at the very least bisexual. Possibly any number of other things, but these are all terms that wouldn't really have meant anything to him at the time. So sometimes when we do this, we're trying to apply modern terms to people that they wouldn't have understood. We're trying to understand, trying to make a guess as to how they might have identified the day. And then there's a lot of times where it seems pretty damn obvious. But, I know people get very tired of historians saying, well, we don't know for sure, and stuff about the cult of Victorian male friendship. That stuff only goes so far, to be quite honest. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go around to virtually do a bunch of Chicago cemeteries and tell some of the stories there. We do this tour once a year on Pride Month, but I decided, furniture stores have Christmas in July. Why don't we do Pride Month in January over here at Mysterious Chicago? We'll start with one of my favorite ones. Now, this is out in Forest Home Cemetery, out in the west suburbs. Well, this is one of my favorite stories to tell, one of my favorite people to research and talk about. Such a fascinating person. I'm so glad that she actually has a visible monument. Not saying that I'm glad that she's dead, but I was kind of surprised to find a visible monument here. But it is a young woman, or it was a young woman when her story takes place, by the name of Viola Larson. She's right here. Now, Viola Larson, here's an article about her from the Chicago American. Girl steals rig to write about it. There's kind of a Freudian slip there to say to white about it. So anytime I start telling this story, people are like, hashtag white people. And she herself would have figured that out long about the 1910s, but in the very early 20th century, Viola Larson was a young teenager. You can see her here looking like Claire Danes. This is like my so-called life 90 years early, right there. She was always getting into adventures that she said she needed to feed her art, like stealing a rig and getting arrested on purpose just so she could write about what it was like. Her work at the time, to the extent that it survives, and her whole persona and her whole style were widely assumed to be copies of Mary McLean, who we do talk about every now and then. She was a teenager herself in Montana who had written a book called I Await the Coming of the Devil, saying things like, from men who call my legs limbs, kind devil deliver me. She was also known to be shocking, but also was literarily very, very good. You can almost imagine, well, when asked about her, Viola would say, I don't even like her very much. Now, I am a genius. I shouldn't say that myself, but she would say it about herself. You can just kind of imagine her Tumblr. She'd be on TikTok insisting that she doesn't like Taylor Swift, but then recording a bunch of Taylor Swift covers. But here's the thing. Buried in the articles about her are often little things noting that it wasn't just for writing experience that she was doing this. Often, she was also trying to impress girls that she had crushes on. And this is really, I'm kind of surprised at just how clearly they code this at the time. I've never seen anybody this age so clearly coded as queer, at least in this era. Well, here's a letter that she got in some trouble for writing to a friend. Dear Miss Berger, I sincerely hope you had a pleasant Christmas, as is the last one you will enjoy for some time. A club of us girls will see to that. You have a lovely home and enjoy it, but you will be made to suffer a little. This is when she had fallen in a group of communists. But you are beautiful. I say this much even if I am a girl. Girls can admire as well as men. Someone is jealous of you. You know the best. You know best why. And the one. That would probably be her. Their one object is their downfall. They are endeavoring to cause your downfall. Surely would have been her. These kind of things got her into quite a bit of trouble. She was always making the news for one kind of stunt or another. Then eventually, her books never did come out. But some excerpts were written for the Chicago American. So here's her autobiography. Chapter 1, to begin with, I am queer. Chapter 2, yes, I am queer. Now, this is the early 20th century. She didn't necessarily mean it the way that we would mean that word now. On the other hand, yes, she did. There's a picture of her from 1909, or there's an article. From 1909, she got married to a guy just to write about it. The marriage lasted very short time. Then she made the news once again for trying to sell her finger. She said, I read that somebody needed a finger transplant and she offered to sell hers for X amount of money. She was always looking to get her name in the papers in those days. But then after this article in 1911, she just disappears off of the map until all of a sudden she shows back up in 1936 when she won a humanitarian medal. Now, Viola Larson, by now 25 years after that nice 1911 picture, she's a sturdy, gray-haired woman of 50, who has cared for more than 3,000 stray and abandoned dogs last year alone. All of a sudden, in the 1930s, she became known as Chicago's beloved dog lady. Sometime in her 20s, she took up a whole lifestyle of just going out in the morning and finding stray dogs and rescuing stray dogs. There's a picture when she saved a few of them after helping people escape from a burning theater as well. So I love it when these stories have a happy ending. I really wonder if you came across her in this era, in like the 1930s, and asked her about the old sensational Viola stories, how she would have responded to that. Whether she would have just been like, don't even remind me, or just kind of laugh and say, oh, that was a long time ago. Or, who knows how she might have reacted. But I do know from her census form around 1940 that she was living with a woman who was her roommate at the time. Once again, I love it when these things have a happy ending. It's interesting to me when I'm reading like the Johann Hawk wives stories. The Johann Hawk's wives are all like 42 and they describe them like they're 90. They talk about themselves like they're 90. And I'm also going to switch over out to the suburbs out in Arlington Heights. I don't have video leading up to this one, but this is the grave of Nelise Rosenfeld. who a lifetime before her, almost 60 years before her death in 1981, she was known as Lillian Colley, the proprietress of the Wind Blew Inn. Among her various other adventures in Chicago, she was a young flapper who kind of set the city on fire in the early 1920s. Well, before she had become, picture seems to be missing here, but she worked for a while as a reporter during the era when they would hire women to be reporters and call them things like our little girl reporter, which was kind of a new thing. Women had been reporters for a generation or so by then, about as long as men had, and actually got individual bylines way earlier. But it kind of goes in and out. The early ones were all called our girl reporter, then there was a period where they weren't, and then there was a period where they were again. But she would do things like, the old stunt of passing out in the street to see what happened, something pioneered by Winifred Black, who was also a Chicagoan, but about a generation before Lillian did it. But then in the early 20s, she started up her own place, the Wind Blew Inn, along with the woman who was always described as her aide in the newspapers. Now, the Wind Blew Inn was a bohemian tea room that they ran together. It was known as a place, it was known in the neighborhood of Towertown, which means that it was almost certainly would have been thought of as a queer hangout at the time in the 1920s. Certainly it had that sort of a reputation where all sorts of genius types and artsy types. The cops used to raid the place all the time because of rumors that she was hosting petting parties there. Make-out parties. One night they hauled everybody into court, dismissed everybody except for Lillian and Virginia. A judge sentenced them to read a book of fairy tales to cure them of their feminist and bohemian ideals. And they dutifully marched across the street to the library and checked out a book of fairy tales. I don't think it ever exactly worked. Now, the Wind Blew Inn, shortly thereafter the place was torched, and the chief suspect was Virginia herself, who was either newly pregnant at the time or about to be. It was about 9 months later she gave birth to a kid. She had gone off into hiding with one of the guys who helped terrible Tommy O'Connor escape from prison back in 1921. She then became the leader of a gang of bank robbers. She would plan out every detail of her husband and their buddies' bank robberies. We can kind of only imagine what must have gone down between her and Lillian. Modern writers have generally assumed that she might have been queer. I did manage to get a hold of her son a few years back, and I asked him, and he said he really didn't know for sure, but it would have explained a lot. He certainly didn't know about Virginia, but he was able to name a couple of different women that he strongly suspected she might have had affairs with. And certainly he was able to say that when he came out back in the 70s, it didn't bother her even a little. And there is a picture around here. Well, where did my picture go? I don't know where my picture went, but I'm going to find it again really quick here. Oh, I see. I just got to do the old make available offline trick. That should do it. There we go. There's Lillian in her 70s with her son Frank. So she eventually moved out of Chicago to live on Cannery Row for a while out in California. Then when she had a play produced on Broadway, she hopped freight trains all the way to New York. Spent the next generation or so living in New York, writing plays and trying to get back onto Broadway. Went to every Broadway show that opened in the 1950s on opening night, right in the front row. Eventually, she moved back to Chicago, where she lived the last years of her life up in one of those Sheridan Avenue high-rises. We've tracked down the last place where she lived a couple of times around here. She died of natural causes in the 1980s. It was so nice. It was one of the first real Chicago rabbit holes that I fell down. I ended up writing her into a whole young adult novel a while back called Just Kill Me. And it was very nice to find a story where somebody doesn't get serial killed in the end. So most of the people that I write about end up getting serial killed. I don't think anybody in this particular deck did. We're going to move up just a little bit here. It's the famous tomb of G.M. Stevens, originally the H.H. McGee tomb over at Graceland Cemetery. H.H. McGee's son-in-law sold it off to George Stevens, had everybody hauled out and reburied up by the pond. I would haunt the crap out of the kid if I were him. But frankly, it was a good move. Those in-ground tombs are a bad idea structurally. But just up on top of it is the Roget family plot, which is missing one major person, a daughter of the family, Mary Roget Smith. This is her with Jane Addams of Hull House. She was the daughter of Charles Mathersmith, who was a paper company president, involved very early on in Hull House, major backer for the music school where Benny Goodman learned to play the clarinet. When you hear him playing at the beginning of our shows, this is who taught him. Or this is who put up the money to have him taught anyway. There were a lot of letters between her and Adams that were burned, though Adams referred to their relationship as a marriage. It was one of the best things I've ever seen written about this. Is a biographer of Jane said, if you asked me, was Jane Addams a lesbian, I would say yes. If you asked me if she would identify with what we call a lesbian today, that's a little bit harder to know. Exactly what the nature of their relationship was is very difficult to gauge anymore, but certainly they were what we would call life partners. Jane herself referred to this as a marriage, and this also wasn't the first person associated with Hull House, the first woman associated. She had also been associated with Ellen Starr Gates for a while before this. She was actually cremated. Her ashes are scattered in Lake Michigan, but this is as close as we get to a monument to her at all. And just elsewhere in Graceland, now, there's another one. There are other ones where we just have to kind of suspect or go based on rumors or anecdotes. Just the very fact that something like that circulated at the time is worth thinking of. There's another unmarked one here. You can just kind of tell that it's near this cylindrical one for the Rickards family. It is the grave of a woman named Mary Hastings Bradley, who initially made her fortune as a travel writer. She went on a safari to Africa. Her book about that was a major influence on Teddy Roosevelt going off on his later trip. But then she got more into writing mysteries, which was just better money than travel writing. But lived, really this almost Indiana Jones-like lifestyle. One of a couple of women here at Graceland who did. Well, really the way we talk about her is to bring up her daughter, Alice, who had a long career writing science fiction under the name James Tiptree Jr. Now, once again, it's very difficult to know for sure, but in her letters, their correspondence with other science fiction authors, she lived as a woman, as a man named James Tiptree, for many, many years, and only kind of later in life admitted that that wasn't really her true lived identity outside of the science fiction realm. So again, it's very difficult to know how she would identify today. I very much doubt she would claim to be cisgender today. We're going to move on up. Elsewhere in Graceland, another one. I never get tired of telling the story of Alice Getty here in the Getty Mausoleum. We'll cruise around to get a better look at this. It's this Louis Sullivan designed mausoleum. Frank Lloyd Wright said that this thing was a work of art the way that a poem, like a Shakespeare sonnet, is a work of art. It's really everything we think about Louis Sullivan's architecture. This is almost like the quintessential example of Sullivan's architecture, all made into miniature. We've got the arches, we've got the ornamentation, but the fact that it's such a gorgeous architectural technique... Hey, Ronnie's out there! Hey, hi, Ronnie. That's my wife who is out in college right now. But this is the tomb of the Getty family, not like the photographic Gettys or the J. Paul Gettys. Henry Getty was a lumberman. Now, lumberman, he was a partner in the Ryerson firm. Mr. Ryerson also had a Louis Sullivan designed mausoleum here in the cemetery. After the death of his wife, he and his daughter Alice started traveling around the world and collecting art. Alice initially wanted to be a composer, but in her 20s she switched gears and started becoming an expert on Buddhism. Whether she was a practitioner or not, there are varying accounts. It's kind of tough to tell for sure because every article about it is like, look what this society girl is doing now. But she wrote a whole book called The Gods of Northern Buddhism, Their History, Iconography, and Progressive Evolution Across the Northern Buddhist Countries. It's a very scholarly, academic, and erudite work. She switched gears again during World War I when the fighting was commencing. She was living in France. She was able to start a Braille publishing company for soldiers who had been blinded in the war. She was awarded the French Legion of Virtue for this. But after the death of her father, she moved to Japan and spent time living in a monastery with an obscure Buddhist sect, one that's still not really that well understood by the Western world. She wrote a manuscript about her time there, but that manuscript is thought to have been destroyed by the Nazis when the Nazis raided her villa in France. After that, she made her way back to the United States, spent the last years of her life studying Ilyana, the Syrian goddess of love. Never married, but had a woman who was her study partner, which in the 21st century and in such writings as we have definitely gives us certain ideas nowadays. But all right, Ronnie, so nice to see you here. We'll swing on by. We'll start with Edith Rockefeller McCormick. We're going to move on from here. I don't have any anecdotes about Edith Rockefeller McCormick, as relates to this tour tonight. Ronnie, you just show up and you turn the whole thing on its head. Lynn, I've got the name of the Buddhist sect, but I don't want to try to pronounce it now. I'm gonna get it wrong. Ronnie is studying for her master's in writing for children and young adults at a school in Minnesota. I'll be in Minnesota myself next weekend. Also, while we're at this particularly long walk to the next grave, I'll mention again, a few of the next presentations are going to be on Wednesday nights instead of Thursday. Thursday, I want you all to go to the Chicago for Chicagoans broadcast. I'm going to be doing one. Layla's going to be doing one. Mandy's going to be doing one. So it's not like we won't have stuff to do on Thursdays, because we will. It'll just be a little bit different. Maybe I'll have like something broadcasting on here just to keep a chat up. But make sure you're running that one. So, all right, well, we're coming here to look at the newly placed grave for a guy by the name of David Lee Hull. Now, David Lee Hull was a philosopher at Northwestern University. He was a pioneer of the field of the philosophy of biology. I've tried to write about it myself. I've tried to read about it, but it's all just completely over my head. And David himself, when asked about it late in life, would just say, boring, and want to talk instead about his experiences as a gay man in Chicago back in the 1950s. And we can see here there's this David Lee Hull philosopher, alas, poor world, what treasure that hath thou lost? I know that's Shakespeare. I think it's Venus and Adonis. But one of his stories that he would tell the most was about a couple of bars called Volleyballs and Scarlet Ribbon. Scarlet Ribbon was for men, Volleyballs was for women. It would have been just to the right of the site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It was also a folk music club in the 1960s. But in the 1950s, it was two bars separated by swinging saloon-style doors. The way David described it is Scarlet Ribbon would be men dancing their heads off. Volleyballs would be 6 women getting in fights at the time. But this was the kind of experience he wanted to write about. Raids were common at the time. There weren't that many open bars at the time in the 1950s. You know, there'd been a handful here and there. And, of course, clubs back in Bronzeville back in the 1930s. So then in the early 1980s, his partner was one of the first AIDS casualties. And he was just shocked by how callous and how cruel the medical community was to that at the time. So he opened up his own home as sort of a hospice. And at various times, the place could get very crowded towards during the worst of the crisis. After that, things cooled down after prevention and drugs got a lot better for it. But he never really regained his stamina, and died relatively young in 2010. But one of his friends said he was about 5'2", but he was the biggest man that I ever met. Let's just move on. We'll stick in Graceland a little bit. Bruce, this is Mies van der Rohe. I don't know anything about Mies van der Rohe being gay. This is just how this one was filmed, I guess. One of the longer ones, too. Okay, we're just going to move away from the plain black rectangle marking Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Absolutely a perfect marker for him. And also a very appropriate one nearby for another architect. This is Bruce Goff, who was an architect around the same time as Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, though he mostly did private houses, not skyscrapers. But his houses look like this. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's looked about like his gravestone, plain black rectangles for the most part. Bruce Goff was designing things like this. There's lately been a whole, and I absolutely love this place. This is a vibe that I just love, this like 1950s Playboy bachelor pad aesthetic. I just love that style. You can see in the background, that's basically how I've decorated my own place. That same basic mid-century vibe. He was teaching at the University of Oklahoma. The University of Oklahoma insists that he wasn't fired because he was gay, though that was generally the sense people had at the time, certainly. They've actually recently had a retrospective of his works at that university, trying to make things a little bit better, I guess. We'll move over just a bit. There's another guy right by him. John Cockrell was an interior designer and a furniture maker. It was really kind of splitting the difference between Ludwig Mies van der Rohe to his right and Bruce Goff to his left, if you're facing the other direction from here. But he designed these very industrial but not quite modernist designs. Very steely, they were kind of a reflection of not the atomic age, but the electronic age. 1980s paper does quote him about talking about how you had to have plans to balance these things out. Here's him with one of his tables that he had designed. Stuff for the electronic age. He died in 1988. I believe he was another AIDS casualty. You see that quite a lot with one thing you notice is a lot of the known queer gravestones in Graceland is like the late 1980s, early 1990s. This is a sculpture. It's not really the grave here. We're going to talk about the sculptor of this statue, Nellie Verne Walker. Now, Nellie Verne Walker was a protege of Laredo Taft, who did things like the Eternal Silence statue here in Graceland Cemetery. She herself, it's another one I don't know for sure. She never married and was quoted as saying, "Well, I've just never met a man who interested me as much as my work did." We're kind of making assumptions here, but I'm going to go ahead and assume it's probably a pretty good guess. That happens quite a bit. There's some of them, like biographers are almost unanimous, or people who study them are absolutely sure of it. In this case, it's Sheldon Pierce Anderson. There's even a pride flag that is put there. So whenever I see the flag there, I kind of assume someone might know something that I don't. Let's see if we can zoom in on this a little bit, because it's kind of hard. You walk around this and walk around and don't know who you're looking at the grave of. Here, but if you look underneath the neck, very carefully, you can see this is the architect, Pierce Anderson. He was in the firm of Graham Anderson, Probst, and White. They did things like, say, the Wrigley Building, the Merchandise Mart, the old Chicago Post Office. They were some of the rock stars of the Art Deco era, really. Mr. Graham, one of his partners, was more into illicit affairs with famous authors. We'll move on back here a little. I'll be posting about the schedule changes coming up, because I want to make sure we can. I'll be at a couple of the Chicagoans talks. I'll be giving one of them myself. This is the Kimball Monument by McKim, Mead, and White. Mr. White also enjoyed affairs that he really shouldn't have embarked on, but for totally different reasons. And this is another situation where we don't really know for sure, but this is Louis Sullivan is generally the perspective of biographers. He was married once briefly, but again was more dedicated to his art than anything else, and also just the sense of aesthetics and the unhappy marriage have led people to make the guesses. And a lot of times it gets kind of weird when we try to make these assumptions and try to figure out who might have been gay in this day and age, because sometimes we're just going by stereotypes, to be perfectly honest. Another case of that is back at Forest Home Cemetery is Grace Carr, a woman who was about middle-aged and died single and died in a fishing accident and left all of her money to her employers, which was very weird. But you know she died wearing a flannel. So just strictly stereotypes here. And again, over here by the Lyon family bench is a guy named Billy Lyon, who was a financial broker, a nephew of John Lyon, the famous broker, who said that a man who enjoys club life and the presence of stage people as much as I do has no business being married. Again, it all just kind of ties into things. We don't really know for sure, but we can make our guesses. So another person who's not actually here, but as a family monument here. This is the Newberry family plot. Now, the daughter of the Newberries, there were two daughters. One died of tuberculosis when she was just an older teenager. And then a couple of years later, her younger sister Julia died. Now, Julia wrote a couple of books. One was her diary that was published years after her death and became kind of a hit. And there was also this sketchbook that was published around the same time about her and her cousin called A Life of Future Old Maids. And from some of her writings in here, we strongly suspect at the very least that she didn't like guys much and definitely pictured herself setting up housekeeping with a woman, not with a guy. And once again, we don't really know for sure, but it was definitely the opinion of her cousin's daughter, Tracy Mygatt, who herself became very active in writing and advocating for world peace. She wrote here, My cousin and I, Julia Newberry, have long since decided that we will never marry, but be two jolly old maids in a large house of our own. We do not expect to be melancholy at all, but to give dinners and every sort of entertainments except tea fights. I'll have to look up what a tea fight is. We shall be happy to receive visitors from all our friends, young and old bachelors, married and unmarried ladies, everybody except children, who we respectfully request may be left behind. And, well, this is coming from Tracy Mygatt, her cousin's daughter, who grew up to be a very out and proud lesbian writer in addition to her peace activism. In their case, a lot of what we'll find for graves that we know for sure a little bit better here in Chicago are ones from much more recent that say things like partners in life over here. Now, Richard Brown is to the right here, and William Lloyd Barber is to the left. Richard Brown was the vice president of the Newberry Library, which was funded with Julia's father's money after his death and after his family's death. He was one of the people credited with crafting the modern independent research library. Also wrote a book himself on Jacksonian democracy. William Lloyd Barber, his partner, was a Vietnam Air Force veteran and also the first male kindergarten teacher in the North Chicago suburbs. These two were partners for 38 years and married for 7. Right nearby them, there's another for a couple that I don't really know much about, Randy Scott Jansen and David Schlishman. I couldn't find much about them. There's quite a few of them where you can just see, all I can really find is the names on the headstones. Thanks for the plug for the Patreon over there. I'll move over here a little bit. There's a couple of these in the deck. I can't remember why exactly I had them there. Oh, yeah, I do. Now I do. I went through earlier and thought I remembered everything. I'm just wandering through, trying to find these things. There's not really a registry that you can check for this sort of thing. This one we're just going to point out just right behind these guys is one of the mystery ones. I don't know anything about, I don't know a particular queer story here, but John Ware lost at sea SS Titanic. I have no idea why this guy has a marker in this family plot. I've looked and looked. I think I found that right before the first time I did this tour and I couldn't wait to talk about it. But also not far from there is Lester A. Sabo, beloved friend of Scott. We have to make our own conclusions here. I know that he was an AIDS casualty in 1994 from his obituary, but this was 1994. People weren't as open about this sort of thing. Which is also why just up from there, not too far up the hill, is Carolyn Kirkland, known as Madam X, shown here with this beautiful shit-eating grin. She was a gossip columnist for the Chicago Tribune, and frequently was known to refer to people who were definitely not straight as eligible bachelors. Among them was her good friend Arthur Meeker Jr., who, this is one of the guys that we do know for sure. He lived until the 1970s, became a travel writer, grew up in kind of the last gasp of the Gilded Age of Chicago, and viewed it all from a certain detachment of the kind of kids who were just a little too young to fall for the whole Victorian thing. When he talked about the Victorian era, he would say, "We must admit that taste was at an all-time low in the United States back in the Victorian days. The fondly remembered liver-colored castle of Potter Palmer had no taste whatsoever." Later on, he became a travel writer, had a long-term partner who got all of his money after his death. There are some letters between him and his parents about this. So that one we know a little bit better. This one's a little bit trickier. The other Titanic grave is right here, Arthur Ryerson. We do know this was his family, but next to him is his sister, Eleanor. Now, Arthur was not buried here because his body was not recovered. Eleanor is not buried here because she's buried in Massachusetts, where she lived for a long time with a woman who was her very close friend. They used to call it a Boston marriage when women just set up housekeeping together. In Eleanor's case, it was quite literally Boston. And we're going to cut across here a bit. This one is another one where the person in question isn't really here. We've got Samuel Allerton right in the middle, the founder of the Union Stockyards. Next to him is his wife Pamela and his other wife Agnes, who also happen to be sisters. After one of them died, he married her much, much, much younger sister. But not in the plot, though entitled to be buried in the plot. There's a lot of paperwork here. Is their son, Robert Allerton, who is half of what is often considered to be the first legally recognized same-sex marriage. Now, we've come across other things like this. We talked about the story of Frances Carrick, who a judge literally recognized that her marriage to a guy, even though they both had the same equipment down below the belt, back in 1923 when she was on trial for murder. But things are moving around on my desk, and Miles isn't even there. Very eerie. He was not allowed to marry his partner, but a judge allowed him to adopt his partner to get the legal protections. This became a trick that any number of same-sex couples are said to have tried out at the time. This is the only one that I really know of for sure. There's quite a bit of paperwork about this between him and his partner with the name change in the Graceland office to this day, though both of them were cremated in, I believe, Hawaii and not actually interred here. But they could be. The family, they were the rightful owners of this plot. We'll cover right behind them the first monument that I know of in Graceland that was to a same-sex couple is just up the hill. This is Charles Harris and Jack Goodall. They were both veterans of the workers of the Chicago Lyric Opera. I've got a thing on here. I've got a thing in my notes. And Goodall worked for the Lyric Opera for 33 years. After his death, there was a benefit performance of Tosca given there. And that is a quote from Tosca right down below. It translates to, "I lived for life, I lived for arts, I never heard a living soul." We can kind of imagine how that might have been meaningful to them. We'll also check out nearby is the broken-looking one for Sewald and DePaulo, who they were a gay couple who lived in Chicago in the 1980s. DePaulo actually designed this monument after Sewald's death. Larry Sewald worked for NBC. They were remembered as a very domesticated and very funny couple. They were an absolute riot to be around. There's only a little bit of data about them. People would write in. Years later, somebody wrote into a newspaper saying, "Hey, does anybody remember this couple? I just wanted to reminisce about them a little." They were both AIDS casualties in the early 1990s. First Sewald, so DePaulo designed this monument for the two of them. So just pause briefly on the coyote here. I got one good coyote picture this morning. And there's just a couple over here that I know less about. We'll just point out, I love the peace sign for Joseph Cantagallo and Robert Toira. Don't know for sure, but quite likely. Nearby them is Ron Reist and Rick Brown. That's another that says partners in life. Also from the dates, we can infer probably what happened. Nearby is this other one, James Ray Scarborough. There was something in his obituary about this, about his dear friend. And just over by the pond, one more cenotaph. This is the half-buried one. It's been cleaned up since this. That is George Veranda, an architect, and next to it a marker for his cenotaph for his partner, the artist Roger Brown. And Roger Brown did art like this. This one is called Rising Above It All. It's a very whimsical mixture of whimsy and really cool Chicago stuff. Like, I especially like this one. This is called Christ's Entry into Chicago. And you can see the representations of the Tribune Tower, the Chase Tower, the Sears Tower, Vandero's IBM Tower, Water Tower Place, and the Hancock Building, plus a rising bridge. And they've got Jesus being wheeled in on a flatbed truck. If they make if this is what Passion of the Christ 2 is like, I might actually see it. That's been kind of the joke of the day on Twitter, I guess, is that Mel Gibson apparently actually is moving forward on Passion of the Christ 2. Well, you know, this is Roger Brown and his dog Elvis. Went to the Art Institute. George was an architect. The two of them met in 1972. George died of lung cancer, I believe, back in the 80s. And Roger, 25 years later, as an AIDS casualty. This is him with his dog Elvis. Put that up one more second. Such a great painting. So much going on in that. But all right, everybody. That gets us right to the ending time here. Now, once again, I don't have dates to plug yet, but on days when Layla and Mandy are going to be doing their Chicago for Chicagoans talk on Thursdays, we will be broadcasting on Wednesdays those weeks, so we can all tune in on Thursday to check them out. And I'll be there in person myself, I think. But I don't want to step on anybody's toes around here, so we'll just do our tours on Wednesday. Plus, I myself, on, I think, the 16th of February, we'll be doing a talk on lost vice districts in Chicago. This will be a whole new one. So shortly thereafter, I'll have like a virtual tour based on that, I suppose. But in any case, we'll just plug for now. That's it, plug for now. The Patreon has been a lot of fun this week in particular. We got a whole great story about the car bar murder of 1895 and the guy who may have been the wrong guy hanged for that. That may be a whole upcoming virtual tour itself. So with that, everybody, I'm just going to put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will hang out like we always do. Thanks, everybody. Hey. Not always Wednesday. It'll be starting the 26th, and then for a couple of Wednesdays thereafter. I'll keep everybody posted. But not starting for a couple of weeks hence. Maybe I'll set up all of the February stuff in advance. Yeah, I don't like people having to choose between me and Chicago for Chicagoans. Though I had Thursday first, I think. Maybe? Maybe I didn't. It's been a while. Arlie, we are definitely talking about the same thing. No worries there. Jordana, it's not almost February. It's still early January. Don't scare me like that. Oh, Disney World, awesome.
There must be someone waiting who feels the way I do. Whoever you are you alone on this night that we choose? That could make
Should be a good new releases thing today on for music. I know there's a new Miley song. I think there's a new Maisie Peters song, possibly a new Samia song, and a new Dylan outtake started going this week. So I am pumped. Also, I rigged up my favorite headphones to be Bluetooth now, so I can listen to records while walking around the house. I'm inordinately thrilled by this. It's rather cumbersome, but I haven't found a pair of actual Bluetooth headphones that I like as much as this pair of headphones. Sorry, you're late, Nicole. This will be up in a bit. In about 15 minutes, I will log off. And a minute or two after that, it'll be up on the Facebook page.
And here's another tune that they'll be playing as long as we dance. Stardust.
Maybe I'll work all that out with Mandy sometime this week. Good night, Evelyn. Thanks, Gene. Ronnie, if you're still watching, remember to email me your flight info. If I wanted to know, this is always one of the lower number tours that I have in the summertime. But this is wintertime, it's the time to do stuff like that. Next weekend, I'll be in Minnesota. So we'll have some interesting and different 10 a.m. tours. It might just be like broadcasting from a car, but Minnesota, I believe, is where the minnows come from. Minnows come from Minnesota. Find a Grave at the Mall of America. I don't know what I'll be able to do for Find a Grave Friday that day. We'll see what we're doing. I don't think we'll have time to hit the Mall of America. I used to go a lot when I was a kid. I went 2 or 3 times anyway.
Helen Ward sings once more. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Ronnie, that's cool. That's awesome. As always, when you're an author, it's always like you're risking your self-esteem to go into a bookstore. I don't even go into it anymore. Every time I do, it's like, oh, well, they don't have my book, but here's a big display of this author who was a total jerk to me. I'm just going to go out and feel like crap all night. Let me go find Miles. Miles.
Everywhere you go, any time of day. Big Ben rings it.
Sammy and Rosie, the upstairs cats, came and wandered around our place for a while. Miles was less than thrilled about that. A new lady came to Lou, bit by a dog with a rabbit too. Miles is pretty chill when it's not 3 p.m. and I'm trying to work, in which case he will not leave me alone. Now he's hopping back up. All right.
Benny Goodman's orchestra and the King Porter's Stomp.
Ooh. I don't know where Priya is, Ronica, but since you're watching, I'll go see if I can find her. Right, this won't last long. She did not want to do this. Yeah. Here you go. See, it's not so bad. You're not in trouble. Okay. Okay. She doesn't like being picked up quite as much. She tried to hide under the table when I went to get her. Now, Priya sat on my chest and purred for a long time today, though she's not usually as into coming and being on TV. I don't know how she knew that's what I was doing. She acted like just now like I was going to go trim her nails or something. Oh yeah, they're gonna be mad when you first get back. They'll get over it. You also haven't seen the baby fish yet. There's a baby fishy in there. Yeah, I do believe there's a baby fish in there, Ronnie. Either that or there's just randomly one that's a whole lot smaller than the others. One of them shrunk. They all look pretty much the same. But all right, that's Benny wrapping up.
First half hour of rhythm.
Which means it is time for me to be wrapping up. That was Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. Just a reminder, I will be posting online which days we're going to run on alternate days of the week instead, so everybody can watch the Chicago for Chicagoans broadcast, including mine, middle of next month. I will be talking about lost vice districts. Mandy will be talking about brothels, and Layla is going to be talking about what it was like to go to the movies in the 1920s. I believe Patty is doing one as well. I'll have to look up what it was, but the whole effing crew is giving talks. I'm giving a talk. I don't want to compete with those. So coming up over the next month, things will be moving around a little bit. Then we'll get back to a normal schedule sooner or later. But all right, thanks a lot for joining me, everybody, on this Thursday night. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay spooky, everybody. Have a great day.